Hey everyone, I'm here today talking about Skinner's chapter 9 on knowing and how we can actually know things. So, first of all, I think we need to go into the different kinds of knowing that he discusses. So, first of all, to know something is to be in contact with directly, physically, so you can know a person or know something specific because you've actually physically come in contact with it and interacted with that in a physical sense. The second is knowing how to do something. So you physically know how to do something. And then, so the third thing is you know about things. So you may have the ability to have different forms of behavior with things, and that could be verbally or physically or etc. Whatever ways you can interact with them and know how to work with them specifically. So, and then the fourth one is knowing how to do something, like you can explain it without actually performing the behavior. So, does knowledge actually come from experience? So, empiricists didn't explain why people should attend to the world around them, or should connect different events together, or if they should even think about them at all. They just said that interaction with the world just gains knowledge because we've experienced it, so we know things. Skinner says that it's due more to than just contact within, that given setting or given events. He says it's more about the contingencies of reinforcement. So, whether it's highly reinforcing or whatever. So basically, it's not so much that we just came in contact with the world, but it's actually, how reinforcing was that event or that setting for us. And going into knowledge as power and contemplation, so operant behavior it's exercising power because it actually has an effect on the environment. And so, it affects the environment in such a way that, of course, the antecedents and everything, the consequences will reinforce the behaviors on the environment. And to think, it's a tentative hypothesis about something that is about to happen. So, for instance, he talks about, I know that so-and-so is going to speak at a conference. Well, you're using that because it's a hypothesis. You may not directly know that because it hasn't yet happened. You haven't been in that environment. You haven't experienced it. And it hasn't been reinforced yet. So you're only basing it on the knowledge that you currently have, based on the setting or the environment around you. And then there's, to know is actually a proven case. So, like, using the example of somebody speaking at a conference, once you actually know that they're speaking means that you've already been to the conference and they're up there speaking right there at that moment, or you saw them speaking at the conference and you're, telling a friend about it afterwards. There's also contemplative knowledge. So this is more like verbal behavior, and it's actually the listener and not the speaker that takes action, according to Skinner. And there is some automatic reinforcement to this where the speaker is actually their own listener. So I kind of think this is more like maybe some self-talk, or that, like, if somebody's just talking and maybe nobody's actually listening or whatever, but the speaker is actually able to, talk things out, or they're just reinforced purely by the act of speaking itself, for whatever reinforcing quality that could be. And then there's perceptual responses, which can help to clarify stimuli and maybe resolve some puzzlement, to help clear up confusion or, some stimuli that doesn't quite make sense per se. So then, going to understanding in itself, Skinner talks about, very simply, can you actually repeat the information correctly? But then he goes into, well, just because you can repeat it doesn't mean you fully understand it. So you need to know why it's actually being said, or knowing the reasons behind what is actually being said. And he goes into this talking about, looking into why a switch won't work. So he talks about, some of his experiments with switches and, like the pigeons pecking a switch or whatever. If the switch isn't working, eventually the behavior is going to go on to extinction, and, the researcher or whatever will basically give up. But then, trying to understand why it won't work, you're going to use whatever knowledge base you have from previous experiences, previous stimuli, to know why it won't work. So you might look into, well, is the box plugged in? Is there a loose wire? Whatever reason, maybe that the switch isn't working. So trying to actually figure out why things won't work is based on previous stimuli that we've experienced, and can use that information to help shape our current behaviors into understanding why, for whatever it may be. Knowing as a possession of information. So he talks about it metaphorically in that possessing knowledge and memories is kind of like keeping and referencing a written note. So, he talks about a memoranda, some kind of a maybe legal document, or at least an official document. Our memories are kind of like that, where we can kind of basically pull them out, we can reference them, use them for information purposes. So kind of just written down and just referenced like a written note, instead of just kind of just the generic memory we think of that's just kind of floating around in our brains. It's kind of, it makes an interesting question of like, so does that actually mean that memories are just written on our brains / neurons or whatever? How are memories actually stored? And then he talks about information or knowledge, etc., is actually internalized by being encoded to store it in the body more efficiently. So, it's kind of like breaking it down into its simplest form so that it doesn't take up so much space. So, maybe like in a computer, you can do like a compressed or a zip file where it'll compress the information so it doesn't take up so much space, but everything's still there. So that our information that we receive from the world, because we're constantly receiving stimuli from the external world, and we can internalize that so that we know things, but we can, encode them so that it doesn't take up so much space in our brains. So then the personal knowledge of the scientist, he talks about, because I'm guessing because he's a scientist, he's looking into things, and, the question comes up about how scientists can actually learn and know things. So they can only react to the contingencies around the individual scientist, And he talks a lot about how the tables and the graphs and the charts and whatever, they actually have no meaning of their own, but only do because of the effect on the people and the previous stimuli that they've received based on based on their experiences, based on the stimuli that they've gone through. And then he talks a little bit about isms, like, for example, empiricism or rationalism, that kind of thing. And he talks about how this is like a development of human thought, not necessarily because one leads to the other, but because one has the characteristics that produce conditions which will produce different behaviors. So it's kind of like a chain. So, you have an antecedent, it leads to the behavior of that we'll say school of thought, whether it's the rationalism or whatever, and then those conditions will actually lead to the next conditions. So it's kind of just a chain of events that they learn. So then I guess the question that comes to mind is, what are your thoughts on actually knowing and understanding and we'll say memories? Do you think that they are just merely written down and encoded into our brains, or how do you think that we actually can remember things and know things that have happened around us? So, all right, well, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I look forward to your discussions. Bye.